Welcome to the Online Great Books podcast, brought to you by OnlineGreatBooks.com, where we talk about the good life, the great books, great conversation, and great ideas. I'm Scott Hambrick.
I'm Karl Shute.
Today on the Online Great Books podcast.
I can always tell from the sigh when it's a book that you don't like very much. I'm Scott Hambrick. Today we're going to read something I really hate.
It's so hard on me. We're going to read Herbert Marcuse's essay, Repressive Tolerance, that is a little chunk taken out of a book called A Critique of Pure Tolerance. It was published in 1969. So we're just pulling Marcuse's little chunk out of there. There's another little essay in there by Robert Paul Wolfe and one by Barrington Moore Jr. that we aren't going to be talking about because I don't know that I could bear to.
Well, okay, so what the book is about, it's a little essay. What it's about is tolerance and whether it's a good thing.
And who deserves it.
Yeah, and who deserves it. And that's what's bugging Scott, I'm sure, because Marcuse does not think that very many people... Well, he doesn't think that anybody that isn't like him deserves it.
I think he boiled it down right there.
Yeah, but isn't that what everybody thinks?
I don't know. Maybe you're right.
It's an offensive book because I figure I'm one of the people that won't be allowed to talk.
Oh, facts already. I mean, well, let's talk about him, and then we can talk about the implications of it, I think. But go to onlinegreatbooks.com/podcast and join the little VIP list. We'll send you our newsletter. Katie just sent me the newsletter from this month, and you've got one of Malachi's drink recipes in there. He calls it the Old Manhattan. Have you seen that?
The Old Manhattan?
Yes. It's basically a Manhattan with a prune in it.
I think I heard about that before.
Yeah, that's what he's been drinking lately, supposedly. Yeah, so we'll send you our newsletter and discount codes, and we're getting ready to restock the famous and rare Online Great Books leather book weight. And the newsletter people will get the first crack at those.
Very exciting.
Yeah. Our man Justin, he's a member, makes those things completely by hand. Pours the lead weights that go in the hand-tooled leather and everything. They're cool. But Marcuse, I don't know about that guy.
Okay, so I thought I might need to defend him a little bit. And ultimately, I don't want to defend him, but...
Why do you not want to defend him?
Because I think selective tolerance is going to... Well, either you have it or you don't. Either you have a society that tolerates differing opinions, or you've just got another despotism like all of human history. And so I think it's a defensive despotism. Mm-hmm. But I want to give it as good a reading as I can, because that was why I threw out that comment. Doesn't everybody think this? Aren't there things that you think ought not be part of your community?
Well, I think so. There are things that are intolerable, right?
Right.
Aristotle talks about there's all this stuff that we should approach in moderation. And he lists some things that a little bit of ain't okay, like rape. I think it's one of the things he says. There's not just an Aristotelian mean. There's not just enough rape. Like none of it's okay. Mm-hmm. So I think there are things that almost everybody would agree are intolerable. But for Marcuse, whether something's tolerable or intolerable is entirely based on whether that thing gives his group more or less power. That's all I could see.
Yeah. So I guess his list of things that are intolerable is awfully big. Whereas I think you might want your list to be pretty small. So there are things that that I don't like. You know, I'm kind of an old man. I grumble, these kids today, what are they doing? But am I going to go out and march and put a stop to it? I probably won't. You do your thing, I'll do my thing, we'll be okay. You know, that's what most people think tolerance is.
Well, that's what tolerance is for Marcuse. He says this repressive tolerance is the tolerance that normal people have for the current state of affairs. He says that the current state of affairs could not be oppressive if the people in the streets we're intolerant of this current state of affairs. So he says that people should be completely intolerant of all the contributory factors that exist inside the current state of affairs, which would include our educational system, the government, our own take on history, economic preconditions, on and on and on.
Yeah. Tolerance is a tool of the established order, I guess. I think I want to read his first paragraph because it's probably the most clear that he writes. He writes like a continental. He hung out with Heidegger, that's why. Heidegger is a root that has many branches that don't write clearly. This essay examines the idea of tolerance in our advanced industrial societies, writing in like 69, forget which year. Yeah. The conclusion reached is that the realization of the objective of tolerance would call for intolerance toward prevailing policies, attitudes, opinions, and the extension of tolerance to policies, attitudes, and opinions which are outlawed and suppressed. In other words, today, tolerance appears again as what it was in its origins at the beginning of the modern period, a partisan goal, a subversive, liberating notion and practice. Conversely, what is proclaimed in practice as tolerance today is, in many of its most effective manifestations, serving the cause of oppression. Okay, so the tolerance, he never defines it, which is frustrating.
Yeah.
Heideggerian. Just don't define anything. Just keep using the word and figure that we'll figure it out. So tolerance, what I was talking about, you let me do me and I let you do you, and it's okay, and maybe we meet and play bridge sometime and we're okay with it. That is what he's talking about at the end of the paragraph. This is an effective manifestation serving the cause of oppression because you and I are taking part in an oppressive society and acting as if everything is normal.
Yeah, you said you do you, I'll do me. Well, you being you makes it more difficult for me being me, according to Marcuse, I think.
Yeah, so you're not allowed to be tolerant in that way, according to this essay, because you're serving the oppressor. Hidden in this paragraph is like the original use of tolerance. So tolerance has an objective, he says. Tolerance has an objective outside of itself. Well, that's interesting.
In the last sentence of paragraph 1, he says what that purpose is. What is proclaimed and practiced as tolerance today is in many of its most effective manifestations serving the causes of oppression.
So real tolerance would be, according to him, the one that breaks down oppression.
Yeah, the elimination of violence and the reduction of suppression to the extent required for protecting man and animals from cruelty and aggression are preconditions for the creation of a humane society, he says. Proper tolerance would only be tolerant to those things that he believes. This is all about him, that he believes.
Well, him and the New Left, yeah.
Right. He says that under his society, that he wants to extend policies, conditions, and modes of behavior. Modes of behavior. He only wants you to behave in such a way that would increase the chances of creating an existence without fear and misery. Yeah, that's in paragraph 3. So this is his utopian vision where you have a society with no fear or misery in it. It's like, have you never been to a funeral? What does he think the human condition is like? It's stupid. This is like the writing of a really clever 15 or 16-year-old. I mean, I'll go on to why I think that. I'm not just calling names. It's like he's ignoring what it's like to be a human. And he thinks that I think fear is healthy. I mean, there are unreasonable fears, but fear when it's at its best is an emotional response that we have that warns us about dangers, right? If somebody kicks your front door in the middle of the night, you should probably be afraid. If, at least at first, if you go to the doctor and you get that pancreatic cancer diagnosis, it's probably right to be afraid. If you lose your job, it's probably right to be afraid. Now, not be paralyzed by that, right? To not lose hope or anything, but fear is a normal response, and I think it's part of being human, and misery is too. Go bury your wife and tell me if you're not going to be miserable. And he would probably then try to redefine fear and misery. Oh, no, I mean this kind of fear and this kind of misery. But I don't think there are different kinds.
Okay, so true tolerance, the tolerance that can only happen in a particular kind of society. that he sets up. This is without fear and hunger and everything. It's kind of the Star Trek world. You know, the projected world that Gene Roddenberry puts into the future where nobody works for a living and nobody has any religion and only the Klingons are bad. Poor Klingons. I always rooted for the Klingons and the Romulans. Did I tell you my perfect way to end Star Trek?
No.
They didn't do it. They should have done it. Because, you know, Romulans... I'm sorry, this is a tangent, but it's our show. We can do it.
That's right.
Romulans are Vulcans. Did you know that? They're the same species.
Oh.
They're sundered brethren.
Oh, Romulus. Okay.
All right. So here's my theory. The Vulcans are a deep cover, deep state op to tear down the Federation at its founding. And so the Vulcans have always been working for the destruction of the Federation. And so this is how you do it.
With hyper-rationality.
Well, they flip the switch, and now they become active enemies. And so the Federation gets completely burned up, and you have Picard trying to save everything or something. I don't know. But it should all go up in flames, like Valhalla.
Wow.
That's my theory. That would have been great. But of course, that's too gritty for Star Trek. They would never do it. So the Star Trek universe is where you could tolerate everything, but only if everything's like that. As long as we have oppression in a repressive society, there are intolerable things. And there are people whose opinions shouldn't be allowed to be uttered.
Right. So he says that there are things we should be intolerant of, and those things are the ones that strengthen the tyranny of the majority. He has some complaints here that I agree with, and he says, the toleration of the systematic moronization of children and adults alike by publicity and propaganda, the release of destructiveness and aggressive driving, the recruitment for and training of special forces, the impotent and benevolent tolerance towards outright deception and merchandising, waste, and planned obsolescence are not distortions and aberrations. They are the essence of a system which fosters tolerance as a means of perpetuating the struggle for existence and suppressing the alternatives.
Okay, so I read that, and I thought, I wrote in the margin, is this wrong?
I wrote, hell yeah, in the margin. Yeah, he says the authorities in education, morals, and psychology are vociferous against the increase in juvenile delinquency, but they're less vociferous against the proud presentation of word and deed and pictures of ever more powerful missiles, rockets, bombs, blah, 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 and the mature delinquency of a whole civilization. Yeah, I agree with that. He's got a lot of good critique in here. You know, so much of what we read are people who are good critics, I think, but get a little wacky in their responses to that.
Mm-hmm. I was reading something. Was it Eisenhower? There was somebody that would not allow you to speak up in a meeting and criticize a plan unless you had an alternative plan.
Sounds good. It's easy to snipe. He's got an alternative plan here, though.
Well, he doesn't flesh it out. I got very frustrated when he started talking about the society that you ought to have, that he says you can figure out from reason, and I kept saying, do it.
Right.
Do it, and then maybe I'm on board with you. So I want to go back to this paragraph number 5, that some things are intolerable. I don't know that I disagree with him on that.
Yeah, I agree.
What's the positive basis for tolerance? Let's define tolerance. That would be a good trick, which he doesn't do, as far as I can tell.
Not in a clean way.
That I let you do what you want to do. Okay, I let you do what you want to do. You let me do what I want to do. Even there, conceptually, can we have it without limit? Because let's say I want to punch you in the nose. Can we tolerate that?
Marcuse says you can if my nose is bad.
Well, if you're the sort that's on... Yeah, but I'm just trying to establish that complete tolerance is kind of an incoherent concept.
Who was it that said, is it Locke? The summation is your rights end where another's begin. Yeah,
so we have to have some limits on it.
Right, I agree. Well, what are the limits he puts on it?
Well, he puts on it limits that anything that opposes the leftist progressive program, which he also doesn't define. That's my biggest problem with this essay. But so when I said at the beginning, doesn't everybody think this? Doesn't everybody think certain things are intolerable?
I think
and so what happens then in political talk is tolerance becomes a partisan tool. I might stand up on a soapbox and talk about the glories of tolerance. I don't really believe it. Nobody really believes it. I'm using it because I think my views ought to be tolerated so that I can gain a foothold in politics for my group or whatever I want to promote.
Or just keep your house and keep doing what you're doing, you know? Right? You might preach tolerance because you want some sort of political power, like you were saying there. But also, like, don't just regular people want to be left alone and people to be tolerant of what they do. Like good, upstanding people, they want to go to church wherever they go. They want to raise their kids the way they want to do it. And the trade-off is they're going to let you do the same, but they want you to extend that back to them, right? They want a reciprocity in this tolerance.
Yeah, so what they don't want to tolerate is your intolerance.
Right. I think Marcuse agrees, but he says, yeah, but this person that I'm portraying here is this normal Joe Schmo. Well, he's got a house, and he's got a car, and 1.7 kids or whatever we have nowadays, and a job, and all of that is repressive to him because in having all of those things, you know, you maybe support the property tax that pays for your public school. Maybe you don't want low-income housing built down the street from the house that you bought because it would make the property value drop on your property. You know, you end up being repressive in the way that you extend tolerance as a normie.
Yeah, I'm just chuckling at that term. In paragraph 6...
Normies are the problem, Karl. Marcuse and I agree.
He thinks that even participation in government can be an exercise in the service of repression. And I thought this was an interesting sentence. To take a most controversial case, this is about 7 lines down. The exercise of political rights, such as voting, letter writing to the press, to senators, etc., protest demonstrations with a priori renunciation of counter-violence, in a society of total administration, serves to strengthen this administration by testifying to the existence of democratic liberties which, in reality, have changed their content and lost their effectiveness. In such a case, freedom of opinion, of assembly, of speech becomes an instrument for absolving servitude. So there you are. If you go, you write a letter to your senator, you call your congressman, you're part of the problem. You're pretending that things are normal and good.
I actually agree with this, but for a little different reason. You know, I think that we're encouraged, you know, you take your civics class in 8th grade or whatever the heck that is, you know. They tell you, you know, that you're represented by these people and that you write letters to the editor, you vote, maybe you do nonviolent protest, and this is how we participate in the system. Well, I've been voting since I was 18, and nobody's ever done what they promised me they would do. I've written reams of letters to senators and so on, and you know, but it's a pressure relief valve.
I would like to see this.
I've got some.
The collected commentary to the government from Scott Hambrick.
I've got some of those, but it's all patronizing, right? You go ahead and write those letters. Karl, and then they do whatever the hell they want to do anyway. You know, the more we participate in those I agree with Marcuse in this, the more we participate in those kind of things, the more things can continue to be the same. I got in a big argument on Slack at Online Great Books where I was saying that, you know, nonviolent protest is exactly what people in power want. You go out, you wear your pink hat, you march up and down the street, and then, you know, you have to go back to work Monday and you leave and there's trash out on the street and they come and clean it up and then it's like nothing happened and then politics as usual continues. It's a scam.
There's all these places you agree with Marcuse.
Yep, it's true.
See, I knew I would rehabilitate him for you.
Well, no, I wrote down here where I agree, but for him, though, here at the bottom of 6, you read that little chunk there at the top of paragraph 6. He lists a bunch of conditions, and he says, as long as these conditions do not prevail, then virtually everything really is intolerable. Like, the list of things that he will tolerate, first of all, he doesn't enumerate that list, or he doesn't even tell you what the characteristics of tolerable things would be. But he forecloses on almost anything that normal people would do as intolerable.
Right. So if I were to, I don't know, form a political party, it would be very small. The Byzantine Catholic United States political party. Right. Okay. And so we have some interests. Aren't very many of us. Our liturgy's weird. There would be some things I would tolerate, some things that I wouldn't. There'd be some things that we wouldn't. You wouldn't be able to come into our churches and paint over the icons. Okay? Not going to allow it. And you might say, oh, that's fine. I don't want to do that anyway. Okay, that's probably the limit of our platform. But you would know what it was. You know, certain things are intolerable. You say, well, what does Karl's political party believe?
Well, not only would you know what it was, you could make justifications for those things. And we could do that right now. In fact, if you wanted to, you could say, this is why it's intolerable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we could figure out what our goods are. It's like Pascarella says, it's always the first thing you need to do is figure out what the good life is. Heck, McIntyre said that. He just didn't give any easy answers. You figure out what the good life is, and then things that are aggressively contrary to the good life are intolerable. Mm-hmm. So murder, killing the innocent, is destructive of the good life. It's intolerable. We don't tolerate murder, or at least we shouldn't.
Are you implying that Marcuse does?
You caught that?
I'll tell you what, he doesn't prohibit it. He doesn't have an ethics or morality in here that would prohibit that. These are his words. If you are acting against a passive toleration of entrenched and established attitudes or active official tolerance granted to the right and the left, as long as you're acting against those things, there's nothing you can't do for Marcuse here. He doesn't put a bound on it. Does he?
No, I don't think so.
So we've been talking about what tolerance is. Let's talk about what intolerance is, Karl. Like if something's intolerable, what is that? What does that mean and what does that require?
Intolerable things, I presume you would have to stop them from being done.
So in Karl's stand, painting the icons over is intolerable.
Uh-huh. Which means we need the Knights of Byzantium to stand in front of the churches and prevent you from doing it.
Okay. So what does that mean? You say, please don't?
Well, you start there.
Okay. And then somebody continues.
So then you have to stop them.
How do you do that?
Intolerance is it's a projection of violence, ultimately.
Right. So in 7 here, the background limitations of tolerance are normally prior to explicit and judicial limitations as defined by the courts, customs, governments, etc. For example, clear and present danger, a threat to national security, heresy. Within the framework of such a social structure, tolerance can be safely practiced and proclaimed. It is of 2 kinds. The passive toleration of entrenched and established attitudes, blah, blah, blah. And 2, the active official tolerance granted to the left as well as to the right, to movements of aggression as well as to movements of peace, to the party of hate as well as that to that of humanity. I call this nonpartisan tolerance abstract or pure, inasmuch as it refrains from taking sides. Those are the current kinds of tolerance that he says are these repressive tolerances. And then later on he says you have to be entirely intolerant of that.
Right. Right. What he calls the right deserves no tolerance.
Yeah, who's this party of hate he's talking about? What does that mean?
It's whatever isn't his party.
And what is hate?
I know. It's frustrating. The essay doesn't define it. It's going to end up being, and probably has been, it's a tool for people to use to justify doing whatever they think is necessary to get their political aims.
Yeah. In his writings, where does he limit the natural conclusion that his ideas go to? If he was somebody, and he's gone now, Marcuse is gone now, if he was somebody that wouldn't agree with this, then he needed to put bounds on these actions, and he doesn't do it.
I have to tell you, that's a temptation in the academy. So you can sit, there aren't really ivory towers. You can sit in the ivory tower and you can write something and you can leave all of those conclusions to be drawn. But after all, you are tenured and comfortable and you're not going to be out there suffering any consequences from it. You don't have any particular skin in the game. So it's really easy to write revolutionary stuff.
They have to write stuff. They have to publish.
Yeah, I would say, so he says that this passive tolerance, like participating in writing your letters to the senators and everything is a protection of the established order. I think that's probably right.
I agree with that.
But academia is a protection of the established New Left order. It's conducive to it.
Yeah.
I have heard people belittle students who were not on board with them, call them names, yell at them. There is a dominant political culture on college campuses for sure. And if you're not in it, you're either going to be yelled at or you're going to be in fear and be very, very quiet. So in that world, Marcuse could be super calm and a gentleman and everything and write revolutionary stuff that could be used for violence. And maybe he doesn't even notice it. He's swimming in that water.
Although in his lifetime, Abby Hoffman and other radicals, Angela Davis, other radicals who are taking violent political action were citing him.
Mm-hmm.
Did he not know? Did he renounce? Did he disavow?
Well, I don't know. He might justify it and say, well, look, at the time I was writing this, Scott Hambrick, the Vietnam War was raging. There had been a bunch of students shot down by the National Guard at Kent State, been a bunch of political assassinations. He might say violent times require violent solutions.
Okay, well then let's put a stake in the ground there and let's build a fence around it so we can understand when it's proper to act in that way and when it's not. He says that all of these existing measures, this nonviolent protest, this letter writing, this going to the voting booth, is all accepted in liberal society of England and the United States because it prevents people from making the transition from word to deed, from speech to action. And again, I agree with him.
Yeah.
But he never tells us what proper action is, and he never tells us when it's proper to stop acting.
All right. So on this point, if you, dear listener, don't believe us on this, I was very frustrated. So this is in paragraph 10. I'm having to number these paragraphs as we go. So if my Byzantium uprising party, I would give you our manifesto. You would know what we were going to say. The one thing about the communists, at least, and I just got a copy of this. I need to read it. They made a manifesto. So you know what they wanted. In the interplay of theory and practice, true and false solutions become distinguishable, never with the evidence of necessity, never as the positive, only with the certainty of a reasoned and reasonable chance, and with the persuasive force of the negative. In other words, we can't get full answers. For the true positive is the society of the future, and therefore beyond definition and determination, while the existing positive is that which must be surmounted. All right, so right there, the true positive is the society of the future. The thing that the progresses towards, easy for me to say, is undefined.
Yep.
Can't be defined. So I can't tell you where we're going. But all I can tell you, so it becomes a negative project, I can tell you, he says, experience and understanding of the existent society may well be capable of identifying what is not conducive to a free and rational society, what impedes and distorts its possibilities of creation. Okay, so I can't tell you where we're going, but I can tell you what's not going to get us there.
Right.
Which is odd. We wouldn't do that in driving. We're gonna do a car trip. Where are we going? I don't know. Well, why don't we turn left? Because turning left won't get us there. Well, how do you know? Because you don't know where we're going.
I remember one time Charity's granddad said, "Hey, let's go fish. You're driving the truck and dragging the trailer." So, okay. We were going to go to this one particular boat ramp in this little lake, and we just couldn't find it. We pulled over to get fuel, and I was pumping fuel. He said, "I'll go in and pay and ask for directions." And he came back out, and I said, "Well, what did they tell you?" And he said, "Can't get there from here." I said, "So wait a minute. We've got to drive back to your house and start over?" He said, "I think so." Anyway, can't get there from here. That's the only thing Marcuse can tell us is we can't get there from here.
Did you ever see, there was a Chevy Chase movie where he moves out to the country to write books. The moving van is trying to drive their furniture out to the new place. And they stop and they ask for directions. And the guy says, "Well, so you want to turn left by where the old Smith farm used to be."
Right. It ain't been there in 40 years. That's Charity Granddad Leroy. He also used to tell me, "Don't worry about a thing. Nothing's going to be all right." Paragraph 10, he says that freedom is liberation, a specific historical process in theory and practice, and as such it has right and wrong, its truth and falsehood. Okay, would you please write that down for me?
Yeah, I started to get real frustrated here.
He just makes these proclamations over and over and over again, and this is why I think it's infantile. And so you end up with a bunch of, I'm going to do some name calling, disaffected, ineffective, midwits, read this, and they can read anything they want to into it.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, yes, I'm not free enough. I want to be liberated. This gives me permission to become liberated, to take from those who I resent, and obtain more power from myself. And I don't think this is debatable. We live in a world of scarcity. no matter what you think. We read this is one of the things that went away in the Adam and Eve story. Or plenty is one of the things that went away, and they lived in a world of scarcity and had to toil. I don't know if you believe that or not. I mean, I think it's true. There's scarcity. If nothing else, there's limits on our time. We're just going to walk the earth for so many years, and from that means that we're not completely liberated and never can be. You've got to get some stuff so you can have food. You've got to have some shelter. There's stuff we have to have, and there's not unlimited amounts of time, of energy, of food, of everything. And from that means that there will be compromises, right? We're never completely liberated. There are things that we will always have to do to not perish. And he doesn't carve out any allowances for those things either. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
He's just completely writing up a utopia here. Like you said, that could only be true in Star Trek, where you push the button and the turkey dinner comes out of the wall.
Right.
That's the only way you could have his world.
But, in a utopia, nobody would eat a turkey dinner.
True.
Nobody really likes that.
So there is a certain amount of oppression, which is certainly only political, right? Your views are opposed to mine. I'm going to put my foot on your head and crush you. That was a bad metaphor for the times, wasn't it?
Yeah, probably.
I will kick you with my jack boots. But there's certain oppression that is just strictly political, man on man, power grabbing, essentially. But a lot of the oppression that we feel is because of economic and physical necessity and scarcity and time and resource that I don't think you can get around.
Well, is it necessarily oppression? So I'm looking at the beginning of paragraph 11.
He says it is oppression because it reduces your freedom.
Well, I don't think he's right.
Well, he's not.
A notion of freedom as completely unconstrained possibility, which is not possible. So he says the uncertainty of chance in this distinction does not cancel the historical objectivity, but it necessitates freedom of thought and expression as preconditions of finding the way to freedom. And I'm looking, what is freedom? What do you mean by freedom? He's saying that these things have, that there are false words. They're false because they don't conduce to freedom. He says at the bottom, there are certain things that cannot be said. Certain ideas cannot be expressed because there are conditions of servitude, or they support conditions of servitude. And I want to know what freedom is, because that's really important. If freedom is absolute and complete ability to do whatever you want whenever you want to do it, well, that's one thing. If freedom is more of an Augustinian thing, where freedom is the liberty to do the good,
I like that one.
That's different, and that's not tied into scarcity.
Right.
You could live on your little plot of land and be scraping to make ends meet and be perfectly free.
Yes. Now, I agree with that. But he says there, and I hope we're not making a straw man here. He says there in paragraph 3 that in his future society, there would be an existence without fear and misery. And then at paragraph 10, he says that freedom is liberation. And he says there's a specific historical process and theory and practice that would lead to that. So if he says that his society is going to be one free of fear and misery, and then later on he says that freedom is liberation, well, liberation from what? I'm going to assume that he means fear and misery.
Mm-hmm.
And fear and misery are directly tied to scarcity, among other things.
Well, they're directly tied to being a human.
Right.
How do you... The only way to avoid fear and misery is probably to upload your consciousness into a robot.
And if it's a human consciousness, it's still going to be fearful. Because that's just part of the things that...
Yeah, so you set up, if your vision of freedom is one that can never, ever be realized, you're going to go wrong. You're probably going to do horrible things searching for that utopia that could not possibly exist.
Right.
As evidence, I submit the 20th century.
You ain't wrong. He says here, there in that paragraph 11, he already said that there are certain things that cannot be said, ideas that cannot be expressed. But before that, he says that tolerance cannot protect false words and wrong deeds, which demonstrate that they contradict and counteract the possibilities of liberation.
Yeah.
And again, for me, when I read this, I think that he's trying to liberate us from fear and misery. So, if somebody says something that makes you fearful, you have the right to punch him in the face. if they have something that could immiserate you, like if you don't have enough food and I do, they are, by their inaction, immiserating you. You can do whatever you want to that person.
Is immiserate a word?
Is now. No, I think it is a word. Okay, let's go to OED. God, I hope I coined a word. I hope it's not a word because it ought to be. Immiserate? It's got to be, right?
Is it immiserate or enmiserate? We're watching the language evolve.
immiserate. It's in here. Immiserate. I thought it was. To make a person or a people progressively poorer, to reduce to a state of complete poverty or misery, to impoverish. Oh, first usage of this 1956 in the Solicitor's Journal. I'm looking this up in my Oxford English Dictionary.
Which is a perk that you get as a member. A too much underused perk. It's great fun to poke around on that.
Yeah, if you're an OGB member, you get that. Yeah, but if I'm right, if he thinks to live in fear or misery would be the opposite of liberation, and that you should be intolerant of conditions which would reduce your liberty, Marcusean liberty, then if somebody has a resource that you need, you have license to be completely intolerant of that person. Or if they say something that causes you to fear, Marcuse gives you the right to be intolerant of that person. And under our example earlier of painting of icons in your new Schuttian utopia, you would be intolerant of that. In the beginning, it starts with, hey, please don't do that. It ends with you using force in some way to prevent that thing that was intolerable.
Well, we will hire Vikings and make them a military force.
Be careful. You should always be careful hiring Vikings.
It's either hire Vikings or Turks.
You can't trust those Viking guys. They'll drink all your mead. Big problem.
Do you know it's possible that Russia was founded by Vikings?
It's possible everything was founded by Vikings.
That the first princes of Kiev were like a Viking family that made it down the Dnieper River or whatever river runs there.
I'll buy that. Sounds as good as anything.
Trivia. And because nobody can disprove it, it's fun to talk. Yeah, so false words would be words that go against his undefined utopia, which is the biggest problem. In my utopia, you would know what I meant. You would know what the rules were. Mm-hmm. Here we don't. That's one of my personal biggest problems with progressivism is that it's not a political program, it's a direction. But it's a direction to nowhere. No one can tell you where it's going. Except towards more freedom. Well, but tell me what freedom is. You know, I was watching, a long time ago, I was watching this movie. I believe that it's in Dr. Zhivago, which is a novel by Boris Pasternak and a movie with Omar Sharif playing Zhivago. And is it Julie Christie, I think, plays the girl, Laura. Anyway, I think this is in the movie. There's some old guy who's been completely dispossessed by the revolution, you know, and his house has been taken over, and he just breaks down at one point. Everything he's got is gone, and he's impoverished, and he just sobs. I'm part of the people too.
Right.
If you have no firm rules except the promotion of freedom, which is undefined, you're going to trample people.
Yeah, and he says if they're part of the problem, that it's okay. What's the problem? Yeah, what are the things that immiserate me or make me fearful?
Mm-hmm.
So you can see why a bunch of midwits who don't have good ways to cope with their fear and their misery would grasp onto this, because it gives them license to act in any way they want. Really, because he doesn't put any bounds on it.
Did you like his little paragraph on art?
I did not.
Paragraph 12. Good art is revolutionary art. Bad art is oppressive art. That's pretty much it.
Period.
Well, that tells you what you need to know. I mean, is Beethoven's Third Symphony, it was in support of Napoleon.
Mm-hmm.
I guess, is it not good?
He would say it's not good. I mean, he says it's not good, Karl.
He'd be wrong.
Right. He says...
that's clearly contrary to fact.
Authentic oeuvre is not and cannot be a prop of oppression. Art stands against history, withstands history, which has been the history of oppression. Art subjects reality to laws other than the established ones. What? To the laws of the form which create a different reality, negation of the established one, even where art depicts the established reality. And this is some Hegelian concept of what history is, right? He wants to affect what history will be in the future.
Yeah, I actually wrote gibberish next to that. I mean, this sentence here, but in its struggle with history, art subjects itself to history. History enters the definition of art and enters into the distinction between art and pseudo-art. Thus, it happens that what was once art becomes pseudo-art. Previous forms, styles, and qualities, previous modes of protest and refusal cannot be recaptured. What are you talking about? Is the Mona Lisa not art anymore?
Nope. Because whatever is established becomes a tool of oppression, and whatever it is that's been established.
But then he takes it back at the end. He says there are cases where an authentic oeuvre carries a regressive political message. Dostoevsky is a case in point. So Dostoevsky, easy for me to say, is apparently still art. And then here, I don't know what he's saying. But then the message is canceled by the oeuvre itself. Regressive political content is absorbed, aufgehoben, in the artistic form, in the work as literature. So should I read Brothers Karamazov or not?
Well, no, you shouldn't. I said right here, it's a rejection of our books, is what I wrote right there. Art stands against history, and once the art is part of the history, it's no longer valid. And, so I'm reading this, and I can't help but be political as I read this.
Oh, we're being pretty well behaved.
This is where the statues are being torn down right now.
Yeah, we can go back in time. It would be less current eventy. I mean, Harold Bloom's book, talking about the Western canon, nowadays, or at least in the New Left, it doesn't matter if something's actually good. It matters if something serves the revolution.
Right.
So if Shakespeare doesn't, then we can dismiss Shakespeare.
And how do you dismiss Shakespeare?
Well,
you have to be completely intolerant of it, because your tolerance of that would be a participation in the oppression of other people. You have to be intolerant of it. And there's no such thing as sort of intolerant. There's not. It's
like being a little pregnant.
Yeah, the very definition of the thing. It's binary. There's tolerance and there's intolerance. I guess there's something else. There's a third condition, which would be indifference.
Yeah.
Which a reading of Marcuse would tell you is actually tolerance.
Yeah. For me, this paragraph, as much as I can make it out, reads false. I do not think it's true. I think my experience of art and literature and all of the good things is that they're kind of at a right angle to your political preoccupation.
Are they orthogonal?
They are orthogonal. You don't read the Iliad as a Democrat or Republican.
Right.
You shouldn't. It transcends that. You don't read it and say, oh, Achilles is not progressive. It doesn't even enter into it. It's a book that stands on its own, that is not concerned with our categories.
But for him, it is part of the cultural milieu, which is oppressive. And since it's a part of the oppressive cultural milieu, it has to go. Right? There's no bounds on any of this.
Yeah, let's go to 13, because this is, again, where I get real frustrated with this. Tolerance of free speech is the way of improvement, of progress and liberation, not because there is no objective truth. An improvement must necessarily be a compromise between a variety of opinions, but because there is an objective truth which can be discovered, ascertained only in learning and comprehending that which is, and that which can be and ought to be done for the sake of improving the lot of mankind. All right, so right there.
It's so dumb. He is oughting all over us.
Well, I would hear this and I would say, Professor, I agree with you. There is an objective truth. But then I would point out, I would say, look, on page 87, paragraph 10, you said that progress is unidentifiable, that the future society is undefined. Okay, what's the objective truth if your future society is undefined? And so I really wanted him to say what they were. The next page, he talks about how you do it, cutting through, splitting, breaking asunder, separating right and wrong, good or bad. And I'm like, do it. What are these truths? Tell me where you're going. Give me what it is exactly that you believe so that we know exactly what you won't tolerate. And he doesn't do it. He says it can be done, but then doesn't do it. And this is a typical trick. It's hand waving.
The whole time I read this, I thought, it's so not excellent. You know, in our program, we read Aristotle and Plato, and even the people that aren't excellent are 10 times better than this. You know, you and I were griping about Aurelius on the phone the other day. And this is just so lazy. It's so poorly thought out and so incomplete that it shouldn't be treated as anything more than a curiosity, really. Say, that's interesting thoughts from a fairly interesting guy. I wish he had said more, and it should be left at that. But because it's so empty, or so open-ended, it's not empty, but it's so open-ended, you know, what is the good? What are the rational criteria we use to determine what the truth is? You know, and how does the truth lead to your ethics and whatever? Because it's so open-ended, and because people, particularly new college students, have such a terrible education, they just fall victim to this soft-headed bullshit. You're a young idealistic person and say, boy, it sure has been hard for me to get a good summer job here, and they don't pay very much, and there's an older person that has a better job, and I should have some of what they've got, and so on and so on. The politics of resentment. Mm-hmm. And then you get Marcuse presented to you by a person in authority at the university that you're paying a great deal of money to attend. And he says, yeah, I should be able to act. I should be able to do these things. Everything that exists that contributes to my oppression. Like if fear and misery exist, then everything in existence must somehow have a contributing factor, if nothing else, by not mitigating that fear and misery. So therefore, everything that exists must go, and we must create a new existence. What's that look like? I don't know, but it's going to be better. This is like the shit me and my friends would talk about when I was in the 8th grade at lunch.
You had odd friends.
Well, it's true. I remember Bill, my friend Bill, I won't dox him, was a big UBI guy in, 1984. I'm like, what are you going to do with this, Bill? He's like, well, there ought to be, and it should. I'm like, well, but things are scarce. So if you get something, where does it come from? Somebody else has to be oppressed, so somebody else gets UBI. So that's another thing that bothers me here. I have no love for normies, Karl.
Yeah, I figured that out.
But most people are normies. Most people are normies. And if you change their material condition, you're going to have to oppress them. But for Marcuse, it's okay to oppress certain classes of people. And frankly, it's mostly going to be the normies. Like you would say, Marcuse would probably say, oh, no, there are these people. I am putting words in his mouth here. But I think that he would say, no, there are these people that are in charge of our repression. Let's say the Supreme Court justices. They got a lot of power, and there aren't very many of those people. But he's not talking about that. He's talking about liquidating our art. He's talking about being intolerant of people who are tolerant of the current system. Most of the people that are tolerant of the current system are just normal guys, just normal people.
Mm-hmm.
He advocates for complete intolerance of those people. So now they're repressed. Now what about them? Now is it like repression all the way down? And then as soon as Marcuse's people are in power, now the people who were the normies now throw bricks at them? Where's the end of this? Hey guys, that's the end of the first part of our 2-part series on Herbert Marcuse. Karl and I are going to take a little vacation, so we need to stretch this out into 2 weeks. Sorry about that, but we'll have another good show, the last half of our discussion about Herbert Marcuse next week. Meanwhile, please go to iTunes and leave a review, and if you're mad at us, or even if you're happy with us, you can go to podcasts@onlinegreatbooks.com and drop a line to us and let us know what we've gotten wrong and what we've gotten right and what you might want to hear about on a future show. Thanks.